Adrian, great to have you here today. So, you know all about employment and employment law. When a business has just started and they're running and they're doing well, and they suddenly think, wow, I need to bring someone into the business. I've been a sole trader. What are the implications? Just talk to me about it. What do they need to consider? How does it happen? And all of the stuff which they need to do.
Well, I think the first thing is they really should consider whether they actually need to take on an employee or not. Employees come with responsibilities. There's laws governing unfair dismissal, discrimination, all those sorts of things, and it's a big obligation. So I think on that basis, they need to think about whether or not they need to actually take on an employee. Will some other form of engagement work? Can they have a freelancer come in just to do that task? Can they contract somebody but self-employed on a longer term basis? Those sorts of things are fairly flexible, and they don't have much in the way of obligations. They're not employed. There's no requirement to set up payroll or anything like that. So
that's really interesting.
More flexible.
That's really interesting because the first thing you've looked at is, do you need them? Okay, and there are all sorts of things, I guess, like virtual assistants and other PAs which you could bring in on a particular time-related basis. So actually looking at the needs of the business is a really, really important thing, and probably not what everybody considers.
Probably not. And once you get beyond that stage, once you get to the stage when you think, okay, I actually do need to employ somebody, you still need to think, well, what do I need from them? What do I need them to do? How many hours do they need to work? Is it going to be consistent, or is it seasonal? And that particular point is becoming, or is going to become, more important over the next few years, because there's new legislation coming in which will give a guaranteed right to minimum hours. So you could take somebody on a flexible basis, where it's 0 hours contract or something like that, and then there's going to be a reference period, and they get to have hours guaranteed to what they're working over that reference period. So we don't quite know the detail. We don't know how long the reference period will be and that sort of thing yet. But if you take somebody on over Christmas and they're busy over Christmas, it's more hours because you do seasonal work. You would then have to potentially guarantee their hours going forward as to what they're working over that period.
So that takes on a whole new reference point, doesn't it? Massively for those industries which are seasonal, those which maybe we're looking at sort of like the tourism service sector. That's going to have a big implication.
I think it is. It's designed to protect employees, in the sense that people start working, they are working a certain number of hours, their mortgage is based on what they're working, and then suddenly the employer just pulls the rug out from underneath them and gives them no hours. And it's trying to protect employees from that situation where they end up still being employed but having no work and no pay as a result of that. But it is a balancing act, and I think it is going to put more responsibilities on employers, and it's going to make them less flexible, which comes back to the question you asked at the start, what do I need to think about? Well, you need to look long term. If you're going to take on an employee, you need to understand what you need them to do, how long you need them to do it for, whether that work's still going to be there in a year's time, 2 years' time, that sort of thing. If not, probably go for a more flexible non-employee, self-employed or freelancer type of arrangement.
So that's going to change the environment somewhat, Adrian, and from my perspective, that might actually put people off taking on employees. We've seen an increase in minimum wage. So as some employers have said, I'm having to pay more for less, Alex. They're not as skilled, but we're being driven to pay more. We've seen employers' national insurance increasing as well at the same time. And then in some instances, business rates. So all of a sudden we're getting this impact on small businesses. And as we'd said previously, there's 5.5 million of them out there. Are they going to be looking at taking staff on?
So yes, there are lots of things which they don't employ people, as you mentioned, business rates and lack of flexibility. But employees do add value to the business. There's long-term planning, there's succession, there's loyalty. While you've got your employee, they should have your best interests at heart while they're employed by you. So there are still lots of advantages to having employees.
So quick question, Adrian. Employing family What do you think about employing family, even for succession planning purposes? Is it a good thing? Is it one of those things where you say never employ family members, or how do you see it? How do you see it from a legal perspective?
From a legal perspective, there's no difference in employing family to non-family members. However, the legal aspects are the simple aspects, I suspect, with lots of family arrangements, in the sense that you're not just dealing with the employment situation, you're also dealing with the politics of the family. So I can't say don't employ family members, because many family businesses work perfectly fine, but it does
So it's
add
more complicated.
another level of complexity there.
Okay, no, that's great. It's interesting because we often hear this, especially with succession planning, almost like third generation members of the family are there, and then the children don't want to take it on any further. And it's about how do you manage that, and also the other interesting piece for us at the moment is, if you are moving forward with an organisation and you've taken staff on, you may not be a huge business, but the business isn't there, then how do you manage those employees? How do you have that communication with them, saying that you may want to change the business structure, or there may be a different journey, shall we say that, a different journey, because that often is difficult for the owner manager as well to take on board. How would you see things like that, Adrian?
Part of that is going to depend on the terms of the arrangement between the employer and, let's say, the employee. Some employers, in their contracts, they have, and we can come on to contracts later, but they have the right to reduce hours contractually, or to lay people off, or to put them on short-time working. And if that sort of arrangement will work, because you think that the work's going to pick up sometime in the future, then that's something which you should employ as a business. But you can only do that if you've got it in your contract of employment. If it's not in the contract, then the first thing to do is to talk to the employees to try to work out what sort of arrangement you can come to with them. Some employees might want to do a 4-day week. That could work and get the business through that difficult time. We saw quite a bit of that during COVID a few years ago, and employers talked to employees. They voluntarily went down to a 4-day week, and it got them through that time, or they took extra holiday during the quiet times, so they still got paid, but they used up their holiday, and that just helped the business on that basis. There's no point in people sitting around and them still being paid. So there are other ways, and if you can't get to some sort of arrangement with that, then you may have to use a more formal process, and that's going to involve understanding as a business what you want, and if it is a long-term thing, if you're not going to need that level of head count or number of employees, then you may need to consider a redundancy process, which will inevitably involve consulting with the employees and potentially dismissing them as redundant.
So, Adrian, if you're looking at taking somebody on, and let's say it's probably in a part-time or full-time basis rather than a freelancer and things like that, what sort of things do you need to put in place?
The first thing you should really get in place is a contract of employment. There is no absolute legal obligation for you to have a contract of employment. You have to provide certain information to the employees, their basic terms and conditions, but beyond that, the contract really works for you as a business. That's the document that, one, sets out how you're going to interact with the employee, who the manager is going to be, what their responsibilities are going to be, but it also will protect the business from a point of view of having potentially restrictive covenants in there which stop the employee taking all of your customers and going up and setting up by themselves. So it's a document where that you can use to essentially not only manage the employment situation but also protect the business if the employee were to leave.
Okay, cool. Do you need a job description? Do you need a personality profile? We see all of these things which come through as you must-haves. Is this a necessity?
They're not a legal necessity. The only information you have to provide to the employees is either a job title or a basic description of what they are going to do. So manager would be sufficient in that situation. But it's in your interest to provide them with a job title on most situations. Clear communication between the employer and the employee as to what the employee is going to be expected to do, what their remit is clearly in the interests of you as an employer, because the employee can't know what they're going to do unless you tell them. So if you
Okay,
want them to do something, you really should be there.
So get it in structure of what you actually want them to do and how you want to do them. In terms of the recruitment process, are there set ways in which it should be done, or is it a casual chat over a coffee and you think they're nice? How does it work from a legal perspective?
As to how you recruit somebody, that really is whatever works best for you. But I think you need to look at what you want the employee to do, and whether if you're more interested in personality. So if you're interested in how they're going to be within your business and they're going to meet your clients, then you're going to a chat over coffee might well work perfectly well. But if it's more of a technical nature, then you're probably going to want to test those skills somewhere along the line. So there's no set way, but it's trying to get the end result and using the best method. And there are a number of ways you can use, exams or tests or skills matrix or practical tests or just chats over coffee. It all works, but it's trying to get what you want. As far as the legal requirements, the main thing is to try to make sure that you treat everybody fairly. Part of that is that you may need to make adjustments during the recruitment process. So if you are doing some sort of written test or reading test and somebody has some sort of difficulties with writing or reading, you may need to give them extra time to take that test. Just to be fair, just make adjustments. Disabled parking spaces outside the building, so anybody with a physical disability can still attend the interview. Those sorts of things will need to be considered. You also have to be a bit careful about your wording. I don't think it's as bad as people maybe thought it would be when that sort of thing first came in, but you have to make sure that your wording and even where you place the advert is not discriminatory. It allows everybody to apply for it equally. Just putting a magazine in a men's magazine, although I'm not sure there are many of those around now, but would potentially be discriminatory because predominantly men are going to see that advert and be able to apply for the job. I dealt with a case years ago for an employer, and they were selling products, and it was just a fast moving on the telephone, just phoning up loads of people and hoping to get a deal out of it type of job. They put the advert for this particular role in a university campus, so just put loads of posts up on the university asking for young, enthusiastic people, which is clearly discriminatory. And I acted for the employer, and we had a case brought by an older gentleman who had previously worked for that employer, so they clearly had the experience, and they weren't offered an interview. In fact, they wouldn't have seen it had they not been walking through that particular campus. But the point there is it was clearly discriminatory on the basis of his age, because it was asking for enthusiastic and young, and was put up in a university campus where
which is quite interesting, Adrian, because they may not have felt that it was discriminatory because of the way in which it was positioned and where they were trying to recruit in, and they were just being honest around what they wanted.
Yeah, they were just looking for energetic people who could just pick up the phone and just, for their shift, just phone as many people as possible. And that's what they wanted, but they used a potentially discriminatory manner to get those people.
So in terms of if you're placing an advert or if you're looking for bringing someone in, where would you go to make sure that you weren't being discriminatory? How do you make sure you're doing it right?
Yeah, that depends on the role. There are still trade magazines around, so you can put your advert in a trade magazine if you're looking for somebody for that particular trade. But it's more about just considering the wording that you're using. So try not to restrict the sort of people that could apply. I mean, even with qualifications, do you need that person to have a degree? And if you do, then fine, you use that as part of your criteria. But if you don't need them to have a degree, don't put it in there, because potentially it discriminates. There's been cases on that in the past with the requirement to have a degree was discriminatory against older people, because fewer older people have degrees. There was a change in the education system over the years. So just think about what you're saying, but there's no right place to or right way to do it, but there can be wrong ways of doing it.
Just be logical in your approach and look at the skills you need. Okay,
Yep.
That's a really interesting point, and one which probably not everybody considers at the time. Really doesn't, especially with the implications and coming back to you on it. With regard to, you mentioned you may need to make adjustments. Okay, so there's some adjustments before you actually take somebody on in terms of looking at, as you were saying, looking at whether or not they need additional time, things like that. If you take someone on and then they make you aware that they do need adjustments, how does a small employer take that on board?
You have to understand how the person is disadvantaged in some way, first of all, because the requirement to make adjustments only kicks in if an employee or worker for you is in some way at a disadvantage due to their mental or physical condition. And once you understand if they are at a disadvantage, you have to look at what adjustments can be made, but you only have to make those if they're reasonable. So a larger employer is going to have more scope for making bigger adjustments. A smaller employer may not. If you've got somebody, and say for example you have a small retail outlet and you need somebody there to cover that retail outlet for the times when you're open from 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock. If the adjustment that's being requested is that a person can work only in the afternoon because they're just too tired in the morning or whatever reason, then you wouldn't necessarily need to make the adjustment because you don't need to employ them beyond 5 o'clock. So moving their hours back for 2 till 10 in the evening or something like that, it just wouldn't work because you don't need them for that time, and you also don't have cover for the time when you are open. So it wouldn't be a reasonable adjustment in that situation. But it's hard to say what is and is reasonable in any given situation.
And
just generally,
a bit of a provocative question: can you ask that before you offer them the job?
You can only ask health questions after you've made the offer. You can't ask health questions beforehand. So no, it's the answer.
So the answer is no.
No.
So that's a really interesting point sometimes, isn't it, in terms of how that's then positioned. So you offer someone a job, and they then come back and say that they need specific adjustments. Is that going to cause the employer an issue in any other ways if they feel that they can't make those adjustments and they employed someone in a slightly different guise from what they'd originally anticipated?
Yeah. No, and they're not asking questions or health questions before you make the job offer. It's there to stop you formulating your idea about whether you will or won't employ them based on their condition. It is to stop that discrimination. But afterwards, if the person just simply can't do the job because you can't make the adjustments to allow them to do that, then you would have to look at not employing them, or because they just can't do the work for which they're employed in the way that you need them to do it. So it's a bit more nuanced than that and complicated than that. But essentially, it does create problems, and it will make the employer have to look at what they can do and can't do, and whether that's going to work for both the employee and the employer. But you wouldn't have to carry on employing somebody who couldn't do the job if you weren't able to make those adjustments.
Okay, and then just a quick question, Adrian, as well, is historically there used to be things called probation periods, and they used to be like 3 months or 6 months. Are they still the case?
They are at the moment.
That's why I'm asking the question.
So yes, I mean you can still have a probation period, and in essence, the first 2 years at present can be used as an informal probation period, because you can only, as an employee, only claim unfair dismissal or ordinary unfair dismissal, which is the main claim against an employer, after you've been there 2 years. So for the first 2 years, you have discrimination and you have contractual rights, and those are the only real rights that you have. You can't claim unfair dismissal, so your employer can just, providing it isn't discriminatory, just give you notice and end your contract of employment based on your contractual terms, whatever notice period you have. After 2 years, they have to follow a process if they're going to do that and have a good reason for doing it. That's likely to change within the next couple of years. It's looking like 2027 now that it will come in. It's looking as though unfair dismissal is going to be a day one right, so an employee will have the right not to be unfairly dismissed right from the start of their employment. It is a day one right, but there's going to be an initial period which is looking like being 9 months at the moment. There's no absolute on that, but it's looking like being 9 months, during which the employer will probably be able to do a lighter touch process. So they will rather than having to go through a full process, they would be able to hold a meeting, tell the employee why they're going to be dismissing them, and then dismiss them. And that reason's normally going to be capability or maybe conduct, but there's going to be a sort of a lighter touch approach in that first initial period. After that, the employee is going to have full employment rights and have the right to claim unfair dismissal. So it is going to be a change. I mean, now you can, and we talked earlier about why would you take on an employee? There are good reasons, but there's also the risk of being sued for unfair dismissal, but that risk was 2 years down the line, and still is at the moment. But sometime in the quite near future, that's going to change, and you're going to have to consider who you take on and be a bit more careful.
Okay, that's really, really interesting, Adrian. And it comes back to some of the points we said. Is look at what you're trying to achieve for the future. Look at how that positions within the business which you're trying to create. And there may be options for others who could be employed on a self-employed basis, or they could be freelancers or contracted just for specific hours from another organisation's perspective. So, 3 things which you would consider if you were going to take somebody on.
Back to the same point, do I need to take on that person as an employee? So what status? Is it a long-term role or is it a short-term need? So do I need to employ somebody? Second point is, what am I going to be getting them to do? And thirdly, how am I going to make sure I get the right person? So that comes back to the recruitment process. What method am I going to be using? How am I going to advertise that role? You can use recruitment consultants, etc. But it's trying to find the right person for that job. It comes with responsibilities when you take on somebody as an employee, but they can add value to the business, so it's still worthwhile considering.
That's superb. Thank you, Adrian. That's a really big insight into taking somebody on and the opportunities and potentially some of the moments where you've just got to be very, very cautious just to make sure that you have got the right person for your organisation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening, everybody. And just remember, this is purely discussion. It's not direct advice. And should you have any bespoke needs that you have for your business, please seek legal, financial, or other business advice and support where you need it.